Marcus Brennan knew his life was about to change. Standing on the porch of his Wyoming ranch house, he watched his sister climb out of the driver's seat with that determined look he'd learned to fear over the years. Behind her, a young woman emerged from the passenger side, and Marcus felt his heart stop cold in his chest. It was her. After all these years, it was actually her. "Don't you dare argue with me, Marcus," his sister Claire announced, marching up the wooden steps with her usual no-nonsense stride. "You've been living like a hermit out here for 3 years. The house is falling apart, you're eating nothing but canned beans, and last time I visited, I found a family of mice living in your kitchen cabinet." Marcus barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on the young woman following Claire up the steps, carrying a worn duffel bag over her shoulder. She was exactly as he remembered, yet somehow more beautiful. Her dark hair was longer now, pulled back in a practical ponytail. Those green eyes that had haunted his dreams for 7 years met his for just a moment before looking away. "This is Emma Hartley," Claire continued, gesturing toward the young woman. "She needs work, you need help, and I've already decided this is happening whether you like it or not." Emma finally looked up at him, and Marcus saw something flicker across her face. Recognition? Discomfort? He couldn't tell. His throat felt too tight to speak. "Mr. Brennan," Emma said quietly, extending her hand. Her voice was different now, more mature, but it still carried that same gentle quality that had made him lose sleep back when she was just 18, and he was the ranch hand working for her father. Marcus shook her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm. Working hands. Good hands. He released her quickly, afraid she might feel how his own hand trembled. "Emma's been through a rough patch," Claire said, softening slightly. "Her father's ranch went under last year, and she's been moving from job to job ever since. She's a hard worker, Marcus. You know the Hartley family reputation." Oh, he knew it. He knew everything about Emma Hartley, probably more than he should. He knew she took her coffee black in the morning. He knew she sang old country songs when she thought no one was listening. He knew the exact shade of pink her cheeks turned when she laughed. And he knew with absolute certainty that he'd spent the last 7 years trying to forget her. It had started the summer she turned 18, that golden summer when Marcus was 25 and working as a ranch hand on her father's spread. He'd been saving money to buy his own place, keeping his head down and his hands busy. Then Emma came home from her final year of high school, full of dreams and energy, and Marcus's carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. He'd never acted on his feelings. How could he? He was just a hired hand with dirt under his fingernails and patches on his jeans. She was the rancher's daughter, bound for college and better things. Besides, the gap in their ages had felt significant then, even if 7 years wasn't much in the grand scheme of things. So he'd kept his distance, even when she'd seek him out to talk about her plans for the future. Even when she'd bring him lemonade on hot afternoons, lingering to chat while he worked. Even when he'd caught her looking at him with something that might have been more than casual interest. Then her father caught them talking one evening by the barn. Nothing had happened, nothing inappropriate, but the old man had taken one look at the way Marcus was smiling at his daughter and fired him on the spot. Told him to get off his land and stay away from his little girl. Marcus had left that night heartbroken but understanding. He wasn't good enough for Emma Hartley, and he knew it. He'd taken the money he'd saved and bought this place, throwing himself into building something from nothing. The loneliness was the price he paid for harboring feelings he had no right to have. And now she was here, standing on his porch, with her life packed into a single bag, and his meddling sister had no idea what she'd just done. "I can cook, clean, and I'm good with repairs," Emma said, breaking into his thoughts. "I know you probably don't need help, but I promise I'll earn my keep. Your sister said room and board, plus a small salary. I won't be any trouble." Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "You don't want to work here?" "Actually, I do," Emma lifted her chin slightly, and he recognized that stubborn streak. "I need the work, Mr. Brennan. I'm not too proud to say it. The last two places I worked, the owners got a little too friendly, if you know what I mean. Claire said you're a decent man who keeps to himself. That sounds perfect to me right now." The thought of other men making Emma uncomfortable sent a flash of anger through Marcus's chest. He looked at his sister, who raised her eyebrows in challenge. She knew she had him cornered. If he refused, he'd look like exactly the kind of man Emma was trying to avoid. If he accepted, he'd be torturing himself every single day with the presence of the one woman he'd never been able to forget. "Fine," he heard himself say. "Trial period of 2 weeks. We'll see how it works out." Relief washed over Emma's face, and something in Marcus's chest twisted painfully. When had she learned to look so tired? What had happened to that bright, hopeful girl from 7 years ago? "Thank you," she said softly. "You won't regret this." But as Claire showed Emma to the small guest room off the kitchen, Marcus stood alone on the porch and knew that regret was exactly what he'd be feeling. Not regret for helping her, but regret for every word he'd never said, every chance he'd never taken. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the distance, his horses whinnied in the pasture. The ranch that had been his sanctuary for 3 years suddenly felt too small to contain the feelings he'd been running from. He'd spent 7 years trying to forget Emma Hartley. Now she'd be sleeping under his roof, eating at his table, and he'd have to pretend she didn't affect him at all. He'd have to be the employer, nothing more. He'd have to keep his distance and his secrets locked away where they belonged. What Marcus didn't know was that Emma had her own secrets. Secrets about why she'd really come to his ranch. Secrets about a summer 7 years ago when a quiet ranch hand with kind eyes had stolen her heart, and she'd been looking for him ever since. The first morning dawned cold and clear, the way early autumn mornings do in Wyoming when summer is just beginning to lose its grip. Marcus had been awake for hours, lying in his bed and listening to the sounds of someone else moving around his house. Emma was up early, and through the thin walls he could hear her in the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes and the whisper of footsteps on worn linoleum. By the time he emerged from his bedroom, the coffee was already made, and the smell of bacon filled the air. Emma stood at the stove, her hair braided down her back, wearing faded jeans and one of his old flannel shirts that Claire must have found in the closet. The sight of her in his clothes did something dangerous to his composure. "Morning," she said without turning around. "Hope you don't mind. I found some eggs and bacon in the fridge. Figured I'd start earning my keep right away." Marcus poured himself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, trying not to stare. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." She glanced over her shoulder, and something passed between them. Some current of recognition that neither acknowledged. "Besides, Claire told me you've been living on canned soup and stubbornness. Someone needs to get some proper food into you." They ate in silence, the awkwardness thick between them. Marcus wanted to ask her 1,000 questions. Why had her father's ranch failed? Where had she been for the past 7 years? Did she remember him at all, or had he been just another hired hand who'd passed through her life? But he kept quiet, shoveling eggs into his mouth and washing them down with black coffee. When he was done, he pushed back from the table and grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. "I've got work to do. Make yourself at home. There's a list on the counter if you want to tackle some of the housework, but don't feel like you have to do everything today." "Marcus," she said, and the sound of his first name on her lips made him freeze. "Do you remember me?" He turned slowly, keeping his face carefully neutral. "Remember you?" "From before, from my father's ranch." Emma set down her fork and looked at him directly. "You worked for us 7 years ago. You left suddenly one night, and my father wouldn't tell me why. I always wondered what happened." So she did remember. Marcus felt his heart rate pick up. Ancient history doesn't matter now. It matters to me." She stood up, crossing her arms. "You were kind to me that summer. You treated me like I had a brain in my head, not just a pretty face. Then you disappeared, and I never got to say goodbye or thank you." Marcus gripped his hat tighter. This conversation was heading into dangerous territory. "Your father and I had a disagreement about my future. He was right to let me go. I wasn't cut out for that kind of work. It was a lie, and from the look on Emma's face, she knew it, but she didn't push, and Marcus escaped to the barn before she could ask anything else. The day passed in hard physical labor. Marcus threw himself into fixing fence posts, mucking out stalls, and checking on his small herd of cattle, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind off the woman in his house. But even as he worked, he found himself glancing back at the ranch house, watching for glimpses of her through the windows. Around midday, Emma appeared on the porch and rang the old dinner bell. Marcus washed up at the outdoor pump and trudged back to the house, where she'd set out sandwiches and fresh lemonade. "Thought you might need lunch," she said. "Found the makings in your pantry." They ate on the porch, the silence more comfortable now. Marcus found himself sneaking glances at her profile, the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the small scar above her left eyebrow that he didn't remember from before. "How'd you get that scar?" he asked before he could stop himself. Emma touched her eyebrow self-consciously. "Bull got loose about 2 years ago at the ranch where I was working. Caught me by surprise. Could have been worse." The thought of her being hurt made Marcus's jaw tighten. "You shouldn't be working with bulls." "Someone has to," she smiled slightly. "Not everyone has the luxury of choosing safe work." "Tell me what happened to your father's ranch." Emma's smile faded. "Drought first, then beef prices dropped. Dad had borrowed money to expand right before everything went south. He held on as long as he could, but in the end, the bank took everything. He moved to Arizona to live with my aunt. His health isn't good. The stress of losing the ranch broke something in him." "I'm sorry." "Yeah, me too." She looked out at the mountains. That ranch was everything to him, everything to both of us. Losing it was like losing a part of myself. I've been drifting ever since, taking whatever ranch work I could find. Some places were okay, some weren't. And then Claire found me working at a diner in Jackson Hole and said you needed help. Marcus studied her profile. "And you wanted to come here, to work for me?" Emma turned to meet his eyes, and there was something in her gaze that made his breath catch. "I told you already. Claire said you were decent. That's rare these days." But there was something else there, something she wasn't saying. Marcus could feel it hanging in the air between them, like morning mist, visible but intangible. The afternoon brought more work, but this time Emma came with him to the barn. She moved around the animals with the easy confidence of someone who'd grown up on a ranch, and Marcus found himself relaxing despite his best intentions. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side with minimal conversation. It felt natural, comfortable, like they'd been doing this together for years instead of just hours. As the sun began to set, they finished the evening feeding and headed back to the house. Emma made dinner while Marcus showered, and when he emerged, she'd set the table with actual plates and silverware instead of the paper plates he'd been using for months. Over pot roast and potatoes, they talked more easily than before. Emma told him about some of her adventures working different ranches, and Marcus found himself laughing at her stories, despite his determination to keep his distance. She had a way of describing things that brought them to life, painting pictures with her words. "What about you?" she asked as they did the dishes together. "What made you buy this place?" Marcus handed her a plate to dry. "Wanted my own land, something that belonged to me that no one could take away." "It's beautiful here," Emma said softly. "Remote but beautiful. Don't you get lonely, though?" "Loneliness is better than complications." "Is it?" She set down the dish towel and looked at him. "I used to think that too, but lately, I'm not so sure." Maybe complications are just proof that you're living instead of just existing. Marcus met her eyes and felt the walls he'd built around his heart begin to crack. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. Not that Emma would fail as a housekeeper or that they'd fight, but this, the ease between them, the way she seemed to understand him without words, the dangerous comfort of her presence. "I should turn in," he said abruptly, breaking the moment. "Long day tomorrow." If Emma was hurt by his sudden withdrawal, she didn't show it. "Good night, Marcus, and thank you for giving me a chance." As Marcus lay in bed that night, he could hear Emma moving around in her room next door. The house felt different with her in it, more alive somehow. He thought about what she'd said about living versus existing, and he had to admit she had a point. For 3 years, he'd been existing, working himself to exhaustion every day, falling into bed too tired to dream, waking up to do it all again. No friends, no social life, no joy beyond the satisfaction of seeing his ranch slowly improve. It was safe, controlled, and utterly empty. Now Emma was here, and after just 1 day, she'd brought color back into his grey world. Her laughter, her presence, even her questions, they all reminded him that there was more to life than just surviving. But she was still Emma Hartley, and he was still just a rancher who'd once been fired for looking at her with too much affection in his eyes. Nothing had changed, not really. He had no right to want her the way he'd wanted her 7 years ago. He had no right to hope. What Marcus didn't know was that in the room next door, Emma was lying awake too, thinking about the same summer he couldn't forget. She'd spent 7 years looking for the gentle ranch hand who'd treated her with respect and kindness. 7 years wondering if the connection she'd felt had been real or just the imagination of an 18-year-old girl. And now she'd found him, but he was holding her at arm's length, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. She'd seen the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the same way he'd looked at her that summer. But she'd also seen how quickly he'd shut down whenever they started to connect. Emma wasn't the naive girl she'd been at 18. She'd learned hard lessons about men, about life, about survival. But she'd also learned to recognize something real when she saw it, and what she'd seen in Marcus Brennan's eyes today was real. The question was whether she had the courage to break through the walls he'd built around himself, whether he'd let her in, or whether the past would keep them apart forever. The days fell into a pattern. Marcus would wake before dawn to find Emma already up, coffee brewing and breakfast waiting. They'd eat together in comfortable silence, then split up for the day's work. Emma would tackle the endless housework, the garden that had gone to seed, the repairs that Marcus had been putting off. He'd work the ranch, mending fences and caring for the animals, always aware of where she was, what she was doing. By the end of the first week, the change in the place was remarkable. The house actually felt like a home. Curtains that had hung dingy and grey were washed and bright. The floors gleamed. The kitchen was organized. Emma had even planted herbs in pots on the windowsill, bringing life and green, growing things into the space. But it wasn't just the physical changes. The house felt warmer somehow, lived in. Emma had a habit of humming while she worked, old country songs that drifted through the windows. Sometimes Marcus would catch himself stopping mid-task just to listen, his heart doing strange things in his chest. On Thursday afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. Marcus was out in the far pasture when the sky opened up, and by the time he made it back to the barn, he was soaked to the bone. Emma appeared in the doorway with towels and a thermos of hot coffee. "You're going to catch your death," she scolded, handing him both. "Get those wet clothes off before you freeze." Marcus toweled off his hair and arms, acutely aware of Emma's presence. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm serious, Marcus. You work yourself too hard. When's the last time you took a day off? Don't need days off. Ranch doesn't run itself. Ranch doesn't need you dead either." Emma crossed her arms, and Marcus was struck by how much she sounded like her father when she was being stubborn. "Look, I know you're used to doing everything yourself, but I'm here now. You can delegate, you can rest, you can be human. This coming from the woman who's been working from sunup to sundown all week? Emma's mouth twitched. Do as I say, not as I do. They both laughed, and the sound echoed in the barn, mingling with the drumming of rain on the roof. Outside, lightning flashed, turning the world white for a moment. Thunder followed, deep and rolling. We should get back to the house, Marcus said. Storm's getting worse. They ran through the rain, Emma's laughter bright in the grey afternoon. By the time they reached the porch, they were both soaked again, and Emma's earlier concern about Marcus freezing seemed ironic, given that she was now shivering. Go change, Marcus ordered. I'll start a fire. 20 minutes later, they were both in dry clothes, sitting in front of a crackling fire in the living room. Emma had made hot chocolate, and they sipped it while the storm raged outside. The power had gone out, leaving them with just the firelight and the grey stormlight from the windows. This is nice, Emma said softly. Cozy. Marcus grunted non-committally, afraid to agree too enthusiastically. Everything with Emma felt dangerous lately. The way she looked in the firelight, the way she smiled at him over morning coffee, the way his name sounded when she said it. He was losing the battle to keep his distance, and he knew it. Can I ask you something? Emma's voice was quiet, almost tentative. Depends on the question. Why did my father really fire you? Marcus had known this was coming eventually. He set down his mug and stared into the fire. He thought I was getting too friendly with his daughter. Were you? I was trying my damnedest not to be. Emma was quiet for a long moment. I used to come find you every day that summer, bring you lemonade, talk your ear off about my college plans. Did I annoy you? No. The word came out rougher than he intended. You never annoyed me. Then why did you always seem so uncomfortable around me? Marcus turned to look at her, and in the firelight, she looked so much like that 18-year-old girl he'd fallen for, but also so different. There was a hardness around her eyes now, a wariness that came from experience. Life had been rough on her, and he hated that. Emma! He stopped, unsure how to continue. You were the boss's daughter. I was a hired hand. That's all there was to it. Is it? She shifted closer, her green eyes searching his face. Because I remember the way you used to look at me when you thought I wasn't watching. I remember how you'd smile when I'd come out to the barn. I remember feeling like maybe I wasn't the only one who felt something. Marcus's heart was hammering now. You were 18, and you were 25. 7 years, Marcus. That's not scandalous. It's just a gap. Plenty of people have bigger age differences and make it work. Your father didn't see it that way. My father was overprotective and stubborn. Emma's voice hardened slightly. He saw the way you looked at me one time, and he threw you off the property without even asking if anything had happened between us. Which it hadn't, because you were too much of a gentleman to even tell me how you felt. It wouldn't have been appropriate. Maybe not then. But what about now? Emma's hand reached out, tentative, and touched his arm. I'm 25 now, Marcus. The same age you were that summer, and you're 32, which is nothing. We're both adults, both free. So what's stopping us now? Everything, Marcus wanted to say. Your father's words, still ringing in my ears after 7 years. My own certainty that I'm not good enough for you. The fear that if I reach for what I want, it'll be taken away, just like it was before. But Emma was looking at him with those green eyes, and he was so tired of being alone. So tired of pretending he didn't feel what he felt. Emma, I don't think you understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Rain lashed against the glass, and in the distance he could hear his horses whinnying nervously at the thunder. That summer, he said, his back to her, I fell for you. Hard. Every day I showed up to work, I was hoping to see you. Every conversation we had, I memorized. You talked about going to college, about your dreams, and all I could think was that I wanted to be part of those dreams. But I knew I couldn't be. You were going places, and I was just a drifter with dirt under his fingernails. He heard Emma stand up behind him. You were never just anything. Your father saw me for what I was, a ranch hand with no prospects who was getting too attached to his daughter. He was right to throw me out. He was wrong. Emma's voice was fierce now. So wrong. You were the best thing that happened to me that summer. You treated me like a person, not a pretty face or a prize. You listened when I talked. You cared about my opinions. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Marcus turned to face her. You don't know me, Emma. Not really. You knew me for one summer 7 years ago. So let me know you now. She stepped closer. That's why I came here, Marcus. Not just because I needed work, though I did, but because when Claire mentioned your name, when she told me where you were, I knew I had to see you again. I've thought about you for 7 years, wondered where you went, if you ever thought about me. Every damn day, Marcus said before he could stop himself. I thought about you every damn day. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Emma's eyes widened, and then she was closing the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. Then stop fighting this, she whispered. Stop pushing me away. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling her touch like a brand. I'm still just a rancher, Emma. I can't give you the life you deserve. I'm a rancher's daughter who's been working ranch jobs for years. This is the life I know, the life I want. Her thumbs brushed across his cheekbones. And you're not just anything. You're Marcus Brennan. You're kind and hard-working and decent. You built this place from nothing. You gave me a job when I needed one, even though it clearly made you uncomfortable. You're exactly the kind of man I want. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked at her. Saw the sincerity in her face, the hope, the same longing he felt reflected back at him. I'm afraid, he admitted. Afraid that if I reach for this, it'll be taken away. Afraid that I'll wake up and you'll be gone. Afraid that I'm not enough. You're enough, Emma said firmly. You've always been enough. And I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to leave. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease. The rain had gone from a downpour to a steady drizzle, and the thunder was moving off into the distance. The fire crackled behind them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Marcus raised his hand slowly, giving Emma every chance to step back. When she didn't, he touched her face, tracing the line of her jaw with his calloused fingers. She leaned into his touch, her eyes drifting closed. Emma, he breathed. And then he was kissing her, soft at first, tentative, like he was afraid she might disappear. But Emma kissed him back with 7 years of longing behind it. And Marcus felt something in his chest crack open, all the walls he'd built crumbling to dust. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. This changes everything, he said. Good, Emma replied. Everything needed changing. They stood there in the firelight holding each other while the storm passed, and for the first time in 7 years, Marcus Brennan allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he could have the thing he'd wanted most in the world. But as the evening wore on, and they talked in front of the fire, sharing stories and dreams and 7 years of catching up, neither of them noticed the headlights that briefly illuminated the driveway before turning off. Neither of them saw the figure sitting in a truck at the edge of the property, watching the house with cold, calculating eyes. Emma's past wasn't done with her yet, and the peace they'd found was about to be shattered in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, the world washed clean. Marcus woke with Emma in his arms, her head resting on his chest, and for a moment he just lay there, marveling at the reality of it. She was here. She was real. After 7 years of dreaming and denying, she was finally his. Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw him watching her, she smiled, soft and sleepy. "Morning. Morning." Marcus brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sleep okay?" "Best sleep I've had in years." She stretched, cat-like, then propped herself up on one elbow. "No regrets, only that I wasted 7 years being stubborn." They spent the morning working together, the easy companionship of the previous week now coloured with a new intimacy. Emma would catch his eye across the barn and smile, and Marcus would find excuses to be near her, to touch her hand or shoulder as he passed. It felt like being young again, like the whole world was bright with possibility. But around midday, a truck pulled into the driveway. Marcus didn't recognize the vehicle, a beat-up Ford with rust spots and a cracked windshield. A man climbed out, mid-40s, with the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors. Something about the way he moved, aggressive and entitled, immediately put Marcus on edge. Emma came out of the house, saw the truck, and stopped dead in her tracks. The color drained from her face. "You know him?" Marcus asked, coming to stand beside her. "That's Dale Pritchard," she said quietly. "He managed the last ranch I worked at, the one I left because the owner got too friendly." The man approached, a smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Emma, been looking all over for you, darling." "Mr. Pritchard," Emma said, her voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing here? Can't a man check on his best worker?" Dale's eyes slid to Marcus, assessing. "You must be Brennan. I'm Dale Pritchard. Emma worked for me down in Jackson. I've come to bring her back." "I'm not going back," Emma said firmly. "I already told you that when I left." "Now, Emma, don't be hasty. Mr. Henderson was real sorry about making you uncomfortable. He's promised to be more professional. We need you back, and we're willing to pay better wages." Marcus felt anger beginning to simmer in his gut. The way this man was looking at Emma, like she was property to be negotiated for, made his fists clench. "The lady said she's not interested," Marcus said evenly. Dale's smile hardened. "I wasn't talking to you, friend. This is between me and Emma. See, she left kind of sudden, didn't give proper notice, caused us a lot of trouble. Now I'm willing to overlook that if she comes back. But if she doesn't, well, there might be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Emma's voice was steady, but Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly. "The kind where I let everyone in the valley know that Emma Hartley is an unreliable worker who runs out on her commitments. Make it real hard for you to find work anywhere around here." Dale shrugged, like he was discussing the weather. "But it doesn't have to be that way. Come back, work out the rest of your contract, and we'll call it even." "There was no contract," Emma said. "I was working day wages, same as everyone else." "Now that's not how I remember it." "I'm pretty sure we had an agreement." Marcus stepped forward, putting himself between Dale and Emma. "I think you should leave." Dale's face darkened. "This isn't your business, Brennan. Stay out of it." "Emma works for me now. That makes it my business, and I'm telling you to get off my property." For a moment the two men stared at each other, tension crackling in the air. Then Dale laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "So that's how it is. Brennan's got himself a pretty little housekeeper, and he doesn't want to share. Can't say I blame you." His eyes crawled over Emma in a way that made Marcus's blood boil. "She's a real sweet thing when she wants to be." Marcus moved before he could think, his fist connecting with Dale's jaw. The man staggered back, shock and anger warring on his face. "Get off my land," Marcus said quietly, dangerously. "And don't come back." Dale straightened, touching his bleeding lip. "You just made a big mistake, Brennan. I've got friends around here, people who matter. You're going to regret this." "The only thing I regret is not hitting you harder. Now leave before I call the sheriff." Dale spat blood on the ground, his eyes promising retribution. He climbed back in his truck and tore out of the driveway, leaving dust and anger in his wake. Emma was shaking when Marcus turned to her. He pulled her into his arms, feeling her trembling against him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have told you about him. I should have known he might come looking for me." "Hey!" Marcus tilted her face up. "This isn't your fault. That man is a bully and worse. You did the right thing leaving. But now he's going to cause trouble for you. He meant what he said about having friends. Dale's been working ranches in this valley for 20 years. People know him, trust him. Let him try. I don't care what he says or who he knows. You're staying here with me, where you're safe." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus, you don't understand. Dale doesn't make idle threats. If he says he's going to make trouble, he will. He could turn people against you, cost you business, maybe even try to take your ranch. He can try all he wants. This ranch is mine, free and clear. No one can take it." But as the day wore on, Marcus began to realize that Dale Pritchard's reach was longer than he'd thought. His phone rang multiple times. Calls from other ranchers in the valley, asking pointed questions about Emma, about why Marcus had hired someone who'd run out on her previous employer. The feed store owner called to say that Marcus's standing order had been cancelled due to supply issues. His neighbor to the east mentioned that he'd heard some troubling things and maybe they should postpone their planned fence line negotiation. By evening, it was clear that Dale had been busy spreading his poison. Marcus sat at the kitchen table while Emma made dinner, his jaw tight with anger. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Emma said quietly. "He's turning everyone against you because of me. I don't care. You should care, Marcus. Your ranch, your livelihood, it all depends on good relationships with your neighbors and suppliers. If Dale succeeds in turning people against you, it could ruin everything you've built." Marcus stood and pulled Emma into his arms. "Then we'll deal with it, together. I'm not letting you go, Emma. Not for Dale Pritchard, not for anyone." Emma clung to him, but Marcus could feel the fear in her body, the way she held him like he might disappear. That night, neither of them slept well. Marcus lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch, half expecting Dale to come back with reinforcements. Emma tossed and turned beside him, and he knew she was replaying every conversation, every threat, trying to find a way out of the mess they were in. The next morning brought more trouble. Marcus went out to feed the horses and found his fence cut in 3 places, letting his small cattle herd wander onto the neighboring property. It took him and Emma most of the morning to round them up and repair the damage. The neighbor, old Bill Crawford, was understanding, but mentioned again that he'd heard some concerning things about Emma. "I don't listen to gossip, Marcus," Bill said, leaning against his truck, "but Dale Pritchard's been making some serious accusations. Says Emma stole from her last employer, that she's got a history of causing trouble. Now, I don't believe it, but other folks might not be so charitable." Marcus felt his anger rising. Emma didn't steal anything. Dale's lying because she refused to put up with harassment from her boss. Bill nodded slowly, figured it was something like that. Dale's got a reputation of his own, though he hides it well. But Marcus, you need to understand what you're up against. He's connected. He's got the ear of the Cattlemen's Association, the feed suppliers, even some folks at the county level. If he decides to make your life difficult, he can do it. Then I'll fight him. Sometimes fighting isn't enough. Bill tipped his hat. "Just be careful, son, and watch your back." As the week progressed, the situation worsened. Marcus's credit at the feed store was suddenly denied. A contract he'd been negotiating to sell some of his cattle fell through at the last minute. Twice more, he found fence lines cut or gates left open. Someone even tried to spook his horses one night, though Marcus heard them and chased them off before any real damage was done. Through it all, Emma blamed herself. Marcus would find her crying in the kitchen or staring out the window with haunted eyes. She talked about leaving, about how it would be better for him if she just disappeared. Each time Marcus held her and told her he wouldn't let her go, but the pressure was taking its toll. The ranch that had been his sanctuary was now under siege, and Marcus could feel the strain in every interaction, every phone call, every accidental problem that cropped up. On Friday evening, exactly 2 weeks after Emma had arrived, Claire showed up unannounced. She took one look at Marcus's face and demanded to know what was going on. When he told her, her expression went from concerned to furious. "That son of a gun!" she spat. "Who does Dale Pritchard think he is?" "Someone with more influence than me, apparently," Marcus said wearily. "Well, he's about to find out what happens when he messes with my family." Claire pulled out her phone. "I've got some connections of my own, and I know some things about Dale Pritchard that he wouldn't want getting around. Claire, I don't want you getting involved in this." "Too late. I'm already involved. I brought Emma here, which means I'm responsible for this mess. Now I'm going to fix it." She looked at Emma, who was watching from the kitchen doorway. "And you, young lady, stop looking like you're about to run. My brother's crazy about you, and if you leave him because some bully is making threats, I'll never forgive you." Emma managed a weak smile. "Yes, ma'am." Claire spent the next hour on the phone, calling in favors and making connections. Marcus listened as his sister worked her magic, reminding people of Dale's less savory moments, mentioning his drinking problem, his gambling debts, the time he was accused of livestock theft, though nothing was ever proven. By the time Claire left, she'd managed to plant enough doubt about Dale's credibility that some of the pressure eased. The feed store owner called back, apologizing for the misunderstanding and reinstating Marcus's credit. Bill Crawford stopped by to say that he'd be happy to continue their fence line negotiations. But Dale himself remained a threat, lurking at the edges of their happiness like a snake in the grass. The confrontation came on Sunday afternoon. Marcus and Emma were working in the garden when Dale's truck pulled up again. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 other men climbed out with him, both rough-looking characters that Marcus recognized from the bars in town. "Brennan," Dale called out, "we need to talk." Marcus straightened, his hand finding Emma's. "I've got nothing to say to you." "Well, I've got plenty to say to you." Dale approached, his companions flanking him. "See, I've been patient, I've been reasonable, but you've made it clear you're not going to cooperate. So now we're going to settle this the old-fashioned way. If you're talking about a fight, you're going to lose." Marcus kept his voice calm, but he was calculating distances, angles, how fast he could get Emma to safety. "Oh, I'm not talking about me fighting you." Dale smiled nastily. "See, my friends here have something to settle with you too. They heard you've been spreading lies about me around the valley. They don't appreciate that." It was a setup, and Marcus knew it. Dale wanted witnesses to say that Marcus had started trouble, that he'd been the aggressor. It was clever in a twisted way. "Marcus, don't," Emma whispered. "Please, just let me go with him. It's not worth it." "Not happening." Dale heard her and laughed. "See, Emma gets it. She knows when she's beat. Now you can either let her come with me peacefully, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice, Brennan." "The only choice you've got is whether you leave on your feet or on your back," said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Bill Crawford walking up from the south pasture, a rifle cradled casually in his arms. Behind him came 2 more men, both neighboring ranchers that Marcus recognized. "Bill," Dale said, his smile faltering, "this doesn't concern you. It does when you bring trouble to my neighbor's property." Bill stopped a few feet away, and the other ranchers spread out, forming a loose semicircle. "Now, I've been doing some checking into you, Dale. Talked to some folks down in Jackson. Interesting stories they had to tell about how you run your operation, about how women who work for you seem to leave pretty regular, usually after complaining about the boss." Dale's face went red. "That's a lie." "Is it? Because I've got 3 women willing to make statements if it comes to that. 3 women who say you and your boss created a hostile work environment, if not worse." Bill's voice was hard now. "Seems to me Emma showed good sense in leaving when she did." "You can't prove anything." Maybe not in court, but I can sure spread the word. And unlike you, Dale, I've actually got a reputation worth protecting. When I say something, people listen." Bill looked at Dale's companions. "You boys might want to think about the company you're keeping. Dale's going down one way or another. Question is whether you want to go down with him." The two men exchanged glances, then stepped away from Dale, their hands raised in a placating gesture. One of them actually mumbled an apology before heading back to the truck. Dale stood alone, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Marcus said quietly. "It's over because Emma's not going anywhere. She's staying here with me, and if you come near her or my property again, I won't be as patient as Bill. I'll press charges for harassment, trespassing, and property damage, and then we'll see how your reputation holds up." For a long moment, Dale just stared at them, his jaw working. Then he spat on the ground and stalked back to his truck. He peeled out of the driveway fast enough to throw gravel, and Marcus watched until the dust settled and the truck disappeared. "Thank you," he said to Bill and the other ranchers. "I owe you." "No, you don't," Bill said, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "That's what neighbors are for. Besides, Dale's had this coming for a long time. Someone needed to stand up to him." He looked at Emma and tipped his hat. "Ma'am, you're welcome in this valley any time. Anyone gives you trouble, you let us know." After the men left, Emma collapsed against Marcus, her whole body shaking. He held her tight, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances. "It's over," he said. "He's not going to bother us anymore." "How can you be sure?" "Because bullies like Dale only have power when people are afraid of them. Bill just took that power away. Word's going to spread about what really happened, and Dale's going to find himself on the outside looking in." Emma pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared. I thought I was going to lose you." "Never." Marcus kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I told you, Emma. I'm not letting you go. Not for Dale, not for anyone. You're mine, and I'm yours, and that's all there is to it." That night, they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, wrapped in a blanket against the cooling air. Emma was quiet, her head resting on Marcus's shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I spent 7 years looking for you," she said softly. 7 years wondering if what I felt that summer was real or just a girl's fantasy. And now I know it was real. You were real. This is real. Most real thing in my life. I love you, Marcus Brennan. I think I've loved you since I was 18 years old, and you treated me like I mattered. Marcus's heart swelled. I love you too. Have since the moment you brought me lemonade and asked me about my dreams like they were worth hearing about. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. The horses shuffled in the barn. The wind whispered through the grass. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now? Now we live our lives. We run this ranch together. We build something good and true." Marcus pulled her closer. "And maybe, if you're willing, we make it official, make you Emma Brennan instead of Emma Hartley." Emma sat up, her eyes wide in the starlight. "Marcus, are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to be my partner, in the ranch, in life, in everything. I know it's fast, and maybe we should wait. But Emma, I've already waited 7 years. I don't want to waste any more time." "Yes," Emma breathed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed under the Wyoming stars, and Marcus felt something settle in his chest, some piece of himself that had been missing finally clicking into place. He'd been alone for so long, convinced that he didn't deserve happiness, that Emma Hartley was too good for a simple rancher like him. But maybe that had been the wrong way to think about it. Maybe it wasn't about deserving or being good enough. Maybe it was just about finding the person who fit, who made you better, who felt like home. And Emma was that person for him, had been since that summer 7 years ago, when a ranch hand and a rancher's daughter had fallen in love without ever saying the words. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, hard times, struggles, but they'd face them together, and that made all the difference. The autumn deepened into winter, and with it came a peace that Marcus had never known. Dale Pritchard had left the valley, his reputation in tatters after Bill Crawford made good on his threat to spread the truth. The other ranchers, ashamed that they'd believed Dale's lies so readily, went out of their way to be welcoming to Emma. She became a familiar face at the local feed store, at the Cattlemen's Association meetings, at the church socials that Marcus had avoided for years. The wedding was small, held on a crisp December morning in the little church in town. Claire stood as Emma's witness, crying happy tears through the whole ceremony. Bill Crawford gave Emma away, since her father was too ill to travel from Arizona. The reception was held at the ranch, with half the valley in attendance, and Marcus stood with his arm around his wife and felt like the luckiest man alive. Emma transformed the ranch in ways Marcus couldn't have imagined. She had a head for business and a way with people that complemented his skill with livestock and land management. Together, they started expanding, buying adjoining property when it came available, upgrading their herd, modernizing their operation. What had been a lonely man's survival became a thriving family business. But more than the physical changes, Emma brought joy back into Marcus's life. She sang while she worked, filling the house with music. She cooked meals that were actually worth looking forward to. She challenged him when he was being stubborn, supported him when he doubted himself, and loved him with a fierceness that still took his breath away. On a cold January evening, almost exactly a year after Emma had first arrived, they sat together in the living room where they'd shared their first kiss. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over the space that had become truly a home. "I have something to tell you," Emma said, snuggling closer to Marcus on the couch. "Good something or bad something?" "Good. Definitely good." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Marcus froze, his mind struggling to process the words. A baby. Their baby. He looked at Emma's face, saw the hope and joy and slight nervousness there, and felt his eyes sting with tears. "Really?" His voice came out hoarse. "Really? I'm about 8 weeks along. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Emma bit her lip. "Are you happy?" Happy didn't begin to cover it. Marcus pulled Emma into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "I'm terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can't even find the words." Emma laughed, the sound bright with relief. "Me too. All of those things." They talked late into the night about the future, about names and nurseries and all the changes a baby would bring. Marcus felt a sense of wonder settling over him. A year ago, he'd been alone, convinced that loneliness was his lot in life. Now he had a wife he adored and a child on the way. He had a home full of love and laughter. He had everything he'd ever wanted and more than he'd ever dreamed possible. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked, echoing his question from that first night. "I'm thinking about how close I came to sending you away," Marcus admitted. "If I'd been more stubborn, if I'd let my pride and fear win, I'd have lost all of this. But you didn't. You were brave enough to take a chance on us. You were the brave one. Coming here, facing your past, standing up to Dale. I just tried to keep up." Emma smiled and kissed him softly. "We were brave together. That's what matters." As winter gave way to spring, Emma's pregnancy progressed. She glowed with health and happiness, and Marcus found himself constantly amazed by the changes in her body, the way life was growing inside her. He became even more protective, insisting she take it easy, though Emma laughed at his worrying and continued working alongside him as much as she was able. Claire visited often, already planning to spoil her future niece or nephew rotten. Bill Crawford and the other neighbors checked in regularly, and Marcus realized with some surprise that he had a community now, real friends who cared about him and Emma. One warm May afternoon, Emma's father called. His health had improved enough that he wanted to visit, to see his daughter and meet the man she'd married. Marcus was nervous about the meeting, remembering the last time he'd seen John Hartley, the anger and disappointment on the older man's face as he'd ordered Marcus off his property. But when John arrived a week later, he was a changed man. The loss of his ranch and the years of illness had softened him, given him perspective. He shook Marcus's hand on the porch and looked him in the eye. "I owe you an apology," John said gruffly. "I was wrong about you 7 years ago, saw you looking at my girl and jumped to conclusions, let my pride and fear make my decisions for me. I drove away a good man, and I've regretted it ever since." Marcus was stunned. "Mr. Hartley, I understand why you did what you did. Call me John, and understanding doesn't make it right." The older man looked around at the ranch, at the well-maintained buildings and healthy livestock. "You've built something good here, Marcus, something solid. Emma told me how you fought for her, how you protected her when Dale came after her. That takes courage and character. I was wrong about you, and I'm man enough to admit it. I love your daughter, sir. I'll spend the rest of my life making her happy." "I can see that." John's eyes were misty. "That's all a father can ask for." The visit was healing for everyone. John and Emma spent hours talking, working through old hurts and misunderstandings. Marcus and his father-in-law found common ground in their love of ranching, and by the time John left 2 weeks later, they'd formed a genuine friendship. Summer came, hot and bright, and Emma grew round with the baby. She still helped where she could, but mostly she focused on getting the nursery ready, washing tiny clothes and arranging stuffed animals with a tenderness that made Marcus's heart ache. On a sweltering August afternoon, Emma went into labor. Marcus drove her to the hospital in town, his hands shaking on the steering wheel while Emma breathed through contractions and told him to calm down. The labor was long and difficult, and Marcus spent every minute of it terrified that something would go wrong, that he'd lose Emma or the baby, or both. But at 3 a.m, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that announced her presence to anyone within earshot. The nurse placed her in Emma's arms, and Marcus looked down at the tiny, perfect face of his child and felt his entire world shift. "She's beautiful," he whispered, touching one impossibly small hand. "She's perfect," Emma agreed, tears streaming down her face. "Our perfect girl. They named her Rose Claire Brennan, after Emma's grandmother and Marcus's sister. Rose had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, and from the first moment, she had both her parents wrapped completely around her tiny finger. The months that followed were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Marcus learned to change diapers and warm bottles, to soothe a crying baby at 3 a.m, to function on very little sleep. He watched Emma transform into a mother, patient and loving and fiercely protective, and he fell in love with both of them more deeply every single day. On a cool October evening, when Rose was 2 months old, Marcus stood on the porch holding his sleeping daughter while Emma finished cleaning up from dinner. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. His horses grazed peacefully in the pasture. Smoke curled from the chimney of his house, a house that was truly a home now. Emma came out to join him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his shoulder as they both looked down at their daughter. "Happy?" she asked softly. Marcus thought about the question. Thought about the lonely rancher he'd been just 2 years ago, convinced that solitude was his fate. Thought about the scared girl who'd shown up on his porch with her life in a duffel bag. Thought about all the obstacles they'd overcome, all the chances they'd taken, all the love they'd found. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," he said finally. "I'm grateful, I'm blessed, I'm home." Emma squeezed him tighter. "We're home, all 3 of us." And that was the truth of it. The ranch wasn't just property anymore, wasn't just buildings and land and livestock. It was home because they were together. It was home because love lived here, in every room, every corner, every piece of ground. Rose stirred in Marcus's arms, making small baby sounds before settling back into sleep. Marcus kissed the top of her head, breathing in that sweet baby smell, and made a silent promise to his daughter. She would grow up knowing she was loved. She would grow up on this ranch, learning the value of hard work and the importance of standing up for what's right. She would grow up seeing her parents love each other, support each other, build a life together brick by brick and day by day. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked, smiling, because she knew the question had become their tradition. "I'm thinking about how they forced the maid on the lonely rancher," Marcus said with a slight smile, "and how she turned out to be everything he'd ever wanted but never thought he could have. I was never really a maid, you know, more of a housekeeper / ranch hand / life partner. Best investment I ever made. You didn't invest. Claire forced me on you, remember? Best thing my sister ever did for me then." Marcus shifted Rose to one arm so he could pull Emma closer. "I love you, Emma Brennan. Thank you for being stubborn enough to stay when I was too scared to ask you to. I love you too. Thank you for being brave enough to let me in." Emma looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "You know what the best part is?" "What's that?" "This is just the beginning. We've got the rest of our lives ahead of us. More sunsets like this one, more moments like this. Watching Rose grow up, maybe giving her brothers or sisters, growing old together on this ranch, building something that lasts." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. "That sounds perfect." "It does, doesn't it?" They stood there together as night fell over the ranch, a family now complete and whole. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and earth. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the world felt vast and beautiful and full of promise. Marcus Brennan had spent years believing he was meant to be alone, that happiness was for other people, that he'd used up his chances at love. But Emma had shown him the truth, that it's never too late for second chances, that love can find you even when you've stopped looking, that the best things in life often come when you're brave enough to take a risk. They'd taken that risk together, fought for their chance at happiness, and built something real and lasting from the ashes of old hurts and fears. And now they had forever stretching out before them, full of possibility and hope. The lonely rancher wasn't lonely anymore. He had his secret desire in his arms, his daughter sleeping peacefully against his chest, and his whole future bright before him. He was finally, completely, perfectly home.